We continue the Shiur in Gemara. Tonight we start a topic which is generally learned by law on Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av, is the day in which a number of tragedies took place in Hebrew history. The first place, that was a day when the spies came back from Israel, the ones Moshe Rabbeinu had sent to Israel to spy out the land. And of the spies, 10 of them came back with an evil report. Because the Jews listened to these spies, they were afraid to advance further, to enter Israel. Hashem decreed that day that all Jews over the age of 20 would die in the desert during a period of 40 years. That was the first tragedy. The next two tragedies, major ones, were the destruction of the first Bet HaMikdash, the first holy temple, and the destruction of the second holy temple, which took place on Tisha B'Av. And that is why on Tisha B'Av, when it is a day of sadness and it is forbidden to learn Torah, only this topic in Gemara, which deals with the destruction of the Holy Temple, the destruction of Yerushalmi, is then permitted to be learned. Now this Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the month of Av, follows the month of Tammuz. As we know, according to the Hebrew calendar, the Hebrew months consist of either 29 or 30 days. Certain months have 30 days, certain months have 29 days, due to the fact that the actual length of time of a month is 29 and a half days, approximately. So that we have to divide the months into 30 and 29 to average them out. The month of Tammuz has 29 days always. The Zohar HaKadosh says that the saddest period of time in the year is the month of Tammuz and the 10 days of the month of Av. 10 days because the fact that the Bet HaMikdash was set on fire the end of the 9th day and it burned through the 10th day. You therefore have a total of 39 days. These 39 days, the Zohar Kadosh says, correspond to the 39 curses that Hashem gave to Adam, Eve, the serpent, and the earth at the time of the sin being committed. It also corresponds to the 39 lashes that we find in the Torah that are given to a person who commits most of the sins of the Torah. It also corresponds to the 39 acts of work that are forbidden on Shabbat, which means Shabbat is a day of rest and a day of blessing. Correspondingly, the middle of the week, when we have these 39 acts permitted, it means these are 39 acts of work that a person must endure, must suffer through. So this is sort of a curse instead. That was a curse too given to Adam. You have to work to earn a living, which entails these 39 acts. That's why these 39 days are sad ones, corresponding to these number 39. The story of the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash covers also the battles at that time, the bloodshed, and the exile from Israel. The Gemara starts with these words, a pasuk said by King Solomon, Ashrei Adam Mefached Tamid. Blessed is that person who is always afraid, who is always apprehensive of the consequences. Before he does something, he weighs his action, and if there is any dire consequence, he'll refrain from committing this. If the people in those days had been careful, there would not have been any destruction at all. The Gemara tells us the cases in particular. First, the Gemara deals with the destruction of the holy city of Yerushalmi. The reason for the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash, the reason for the exile, the reason for this long galut, at that time was the sinat chinam, the lack of mutual respect that Jews had for each other. Same reason that the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died. This was the cause of the Churban. The Gemara says, which is worse? The combination of worshipping idols, murder, and adultery, those three, or sinat chinam, Jews who dislike each other for no reason, and who try to hurt each other, not physically, but insultingly and disrespect each other. The Gemara says it's no question at all. There's no match. Because the first Bet HaMikdash was destroyed due to those three sins. There was idol worship that was prevalent throughout. There was murder. They killed the prophet Yeshayahu Hanavi, Zechariah Hanavi. And there was adultery. This caused the exile in the first Bet HaMikdash. How long did that exile last? Only 70 years. At the end of those 70 years, a penalty was completed. The Jews returned to build the second Bet HaMikdash. During the time of the second Bet HaMikdash, there was no idol worship whatsoever. There was no trace, no vestige left of it at all. There were no murders committed. The Gemara says that at most there was one person put to death in 70 years by the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court. That means there were no murders then. There was no adultery. Everyone was pure and religious. There was only this sinat chinam, this unreasonable hatred or dislike among Jews. This caused the temple to be destroyed, not for 70 years, but for 2,000 years we are still in exile. But here the Gemara shows now the destruction of Yerushalmi was due to this very reason. A small incident ignited it. But this was the incident known as the story of Kamsa Ubar Kamsa. The Gemara tells a story that there was once a very wealthy man who made a party for his friends, a big feast. He was well known in Yerushalmi. He invited all the leaders of the city. He invited the chief rabbis, the Chachambashis of Yerushalmi. And he told his servant, go and invite my friend Kamsa. Now, this servant was incapable, obviously, or didn't pay attention, or was a dib, and he didn't listen closely. He thought that his master had said, invite Bar Kamsa. Bar Kamsa was this man's worst enemy. He went and invited Bar Kamsa. Bar Kamsa heard he was invited. He figured perhaps the man wants to make peace with me. So he came. He sat at this catered feast, and the party was going along nicely until the owner noticed his enemy Bar Kamsa sitting at the table. So he walked over to him and said to him, you're my enemy. What are you doing here? I want you to leave immediately. Bar Kamsa said to him, as long as I came already, if I have to walk out now, it'll be extremely embarrassing. Allow me to stay, and I'll pay for my part of the meal, whatever I eat. So it wouldn't cost you anything. This man said to him, I don't want your money, and I don't want you to be here. I want you out. Bar Kamsa pleaded with him and said, look at the important dignitaries here. The embarrassment is too much for me to suffer. I offer to pay you half of all this expense. A tremendous feast, I'll pay half of all this. The owner said to him, I don't want your half, I don't want money, I want you out, enemy. Bar Kamsa continued pleading and said, I'll pay for every cent of the cost. It'll cost you nothing, just please don't embarrass me. The man became furious, pulled Bar Kamsa up, and threw him out bodily. Outside, Bar Kamsa said to himself, I was very meanly embarrassed. I was shamed publicly. What bothers me most is that there were such important people sitting here. The head rabbis were here. They did not rise to defend a Jew who's being embarrassed publicly. My blood was spilled in public, because embarrassing a person publicly is the same as shedding his blood. He said, for that, I'm going to fix them. I'm going to the king, the Roman king who was in power over Israel at that time, but who allowed Israel to govern itself. I'm going to the king and I'm going to report to him that the Jews have rebelled. He should send his army to destroy them. So, he went to the king, the Roman king. He told him, I have information for you that's very vital. The Jews have rebelled against you, they're revolting. The king said, it's a very serious charge. What proof do you have? He said, very simple. Disobedience to the king is an absolute sign of rebellion. Now, you send a sacrifice to the Jews to be brought on the Mizbeach, on the altar. If they accept it, it shows that they are loyal. If they reject it, it shows that they refuse to accept your reign, your rule over them. Sacrifice must be of a kosher animal. Fine. Send a calf. A calf is a kosher animal. Now, he happened to say this himself, but why did he happen to use the word calf? This was destined, a sign from heaven, because the Gemara says, the Torah says, Chamesh, Hashem said, when the Jews made the golden calf, and Moshe Rabbeinu prayed for their forgiveness, Hashem said, I accept your plea on their behalf. I will forgive them temporarily. I will not punish them for this now. But should they ever commit a serious crime, I'll add this sin to it to punish them. Now, the time had come for this major destruction. So this was a sign that the calf is being included. The sin of the golden calf is being paid for now too, or part of it. Of course, to this day, we are still paying for the sin of the golden calf. Every time there is any persecution of Jews, part of that is due to the remainder of the sin of the golden calf, till Mashiach comes. Now, he sent this calf in the hands of Bar Kamsa. Bar Kamsa had connived, planned, a scheme to get the Jews into this trouble. So on the way, Bar Kamsa made a slight cut in the lip of the calf. Other rabbis say the cut was in the eyelid, the lid over the eye. And a slight cut is considered nothing. According to the Goyim, the Romans, this means there is no defect in the animal itself. They would never accept the Hebrew law that a cut on the lip or on the eyelid is considered a defect when the animal becomes unkosher to be used on the altar. Now, why this argument about whether it was in the lip or the lid of the eye? This too refers to the reason for the destruction again. The lip means that there was Lashon Hara prevalent at that time. There was sin of Lashon Hara. And the eye meant that other rabbis say there was Ayin Hara. Ayin Hara means one looked evilly at his neighbor. The animal was brought to the Kohanim, to the rabbis of the Bet HaMikdash. And he told them, this is an order from the king. Sacrifice this animal. The rabbis got together and they said, in order to keep peace with the king, not to incur the wrath of the king, the possible destruction of Yerushalmi, perhaps we had better overlook the law of kashrut in this case. Perhaps the Torah would allow us to sacrifice an animal that is unkosher, in this case, not fit for a korban, because it's a matter of life and death for all the Jews. There was one rabbi there, Rabbi Zechariah ben Afkilas, who said, the people will henceforth get the impression that we are allowed to bring animals that have a defect. Why should we allow this impression to be left for generations? We're going to destroy a law in the Torah. I say that we should not sacrifice the animal under no conditions. This was accepted reluctantly. So they said, in that case then, since you don't want that law to be misunderstood, how about for the sake of defending this vast Jewish population, how about killing Bar Kemtza, so he couldn't go back and report to the king? Again, Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkila said, we cannot do that because people will get the impression that anybody who causes a defect in an animal that is a korban, penalty is death. We don't want a wrong impression of a Hebrew law. And he was the head, and he ruled. The Gemara says that his strictness in law, not directly but indirectly, was the cause of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash and the Galut. Of course, we don't blame him, of course, Chas v'Shalom. The cause was due to the Sinat Chinam, and the direct cause that ignited the spark was the story of Kemtza Ubar Kemtza. The Gemara says that the king, or the emperor, there was a king and an emperor. The emperor sent at that time, the ruler, whose name was Nero, King Nero. He sent him to attack the city of Yerushalmi. This King Nero is one who is reported in Roman history, very falsely, those who know Roman history, as is written by the Romans. They wrote up a wrong report about him because they want to hide their shame, as we see subsequently. Nero came to advance upon Yerushalayim, and he was worried because he knew about the history of the past for the Jews. He knew the miracles that Hashem did for the Jews, and that always they were victorious against their enemies. Why should he risk his life, that of his army, and that of the Roman Empire? So he decided to put this to a test. He would test heaven to find out if heaven was on the side of the Jews or on his side. He took a bow and arrow while he was still at a distance from Yerushalayim, and he aimed at Yerushalayim, directly ahead. He shot this bow and arrow. The arrow went straight, directly to the city. He still was not satisfied. He turned to the right. He shot an arrow, and the arrow veered to the left, again directly at Yerushalayim. He turned to the left. Again the arrow veered to the right towards Yerushalayim. He shot the arrow back, reverse direction. The arrow made a complete U-turn and went right at Yerushalayim, a sign from heaven that it was the will of Hashem that Yerushalayim be destroyed. What more could he ask? He was still not satisfied. And he asked a child, what did you learn today? The Gemara says this is a means of, if you catch a child off guard and ask him what he has learned that day, this is sort of a prophecy. It would tell you exactly what the future holds. The child said, I just learned a sentence today in Navi. The prophet Yechezkel says, Hashem says, I shall send the Edom, the Romans, to destroy my people, the land of Israel, and then I shall take my vengeance against this evil nation. So Nero said, Hashem wants to destroy his home through me, and then he wants to wipe his hands on me, Kaviyachol. I don't want to be the victim to that. So he removed his royal robes, he fled, he converted, he sat down to study Torah, and from Nero, his grandson was Rabbi Meir Bal Hanes. This was King Nero, who did not fiddle when Rome burned. Nero was turned to be a tzadik, a ger, as the Gemara says, a ger tzadik, pure convert. And to show how important a convert is to be regarded, what can happen with converts, that his grandson was Rabbi Meir Bal Hanes, just as Rabbi Akiva too was the grandson of a convert. Now, there's an important question that should be determined if we study this carefully. We said that Nero wanted to find out if it was safe to attack Yerushalmi. How? By seeing if there'd be a miracle to show a sign that Yerushalmi was destined to be destroyed. We can understand Nero shooting an arrow to the right, to the left, back. But what is he proving by shooting an arrow straight at Yerushalmi? What will that prove at all? And then, why did he ask the child afterwards when he already had signs of these miracles? The answer is that Nero knew, and Hashem does miracles for the Jews. So he wanted to test first by shooting at Yerushalmi to see if there'd be a miracle that would change the direction of the arrow. This would prove that Hashem does not want to destroy Yerushalmi. When the arrow continued on its course to Yerushalmi, he felt perhaps the Jews committed sins that they do not deserve to be helped by a miracle of Hashem, but that Hashem would still be on their side. Let us see, he said, if Hashem is against the Jews. He then shot the arrow in the other direction and found that on all sides there was a definite sign. The will of Hashem was Yerushalayim be destroyed, the Jews be exiled. Then he thought to himself, there's also the case of Hashem punishing the one that does this evil. Where did he find proof of that? Because Hashem said to Avraham, your children will become slaves in a strange land. This was an edict by Hashem, decree. When the Jews became slaves in the land of Mitzrayim of Egypt, still what happened? Paro, the king of Egypt, was punished with so many plagues. Why was he punished? He was fulfilling Hashem's decree. The answer is that Hashem always punishes through one that is worse than the person being punished. He selects one who deserves a worse punishment to commit this evil act, and then he wipes his hands on him, kaviyachol. So here, Nero wanted to find out if this was the case too. Is it that the Jews deserve punishment, and that the ones who will carry out this punishment will then be punished even further, or perhaps he's doing a mitzvah? He proved it through the sentence of this child, this pasuk. Hence, he dropped the project and said, if at a time that the Jews committed such serious sins, and Hashem is willing to exile the Jews or his children, Hashem is willing to destroy the holy temple that houses his own spirit, all this anger against the Jews, and yet Hashem says, they're my children, anybody who touches them, I'll wipe my hands on them. King Nero said, I want to be on their side. I'd rather be with them at this time of defeat, rather than be the victor with the reckoning to be paid for later. Now, of course, when he converted, he fled and converted, it was embarrassing to the Romans. That's why the Romans have altered their history. History books have reported Nero insane, as is known. The emperor was faced with a dilemma, so he sent another king, one appointed king, Aspasionis, to attack Yerushalmi. Aspasionis came to Yerushalmi. He besieged the city for 3 years. Yerushalmi had a solid wall around it. They couldn't break through the wall. It was impossible. It was so well fortified, like a fortress. He decided he would starve them out. He besieged the city, surrounded it with his Roman legions, and for 3 years they had the city covered completely. 3 years is enough time for the people to starve. But the Gemara says that there were 3 very wealthy people in that city. One was Nakdimon ben Gurion, who was famous. He was called Nakdimon because we learned the story once of the fact that the sun shone at night for his sake. So great a tzadik was he. Second was Kalba Savua, the father of Rabbi Akiva's wife, Rachel. Third was Ben Zisit Aksat. These are 3 great leaders of Yerushalayim, and 3 of the wealthiest people that ever lived. These 3 people gave a tremendous amount of tzedakah, charity, and they had enough now food, that's wheat, oats, and wine, salt, oil, and wood to supply Yerushalmi, the population, for a period of 21 years. They could have held out for 21 years' time, which would have exhausted the patience of the Romans, and it would have saved the city. However, among the inhabitants of the city were the Bidioni. Bidioni were the young, arrogant, radical students, the youth. And these radicals said, let's not stay cooped up. Let's show our strength. Let's go out and battle the Romans. The elders, the wiser ones, told them, you'll never succeed. Physically, the Romans are so well equipped with weapons, we stand no chance whatsoever. It will be complete suicide to go into battle against them. Let's have patience, hold out, they'll have to leave. These radicals refused to listen, and they said, if we can't get the people to join us in this battle, we'll force them into battle. So one day, they set fire to all these warehouses of food and wood and destroyed everything. And naturally, immediately there was a famine that broke out in Yerushalmi, and due to this famine, this is what ultimately caused the destruction. The Gemara tells us how serious this famine became, what proportions it took. There was a woman in Yerushalmi, Marta bat Baitus, who was very, very wealthy, extremely wealthy. She was very refined, intellectual, from the elegant type. And at the time of this famine, she had no food to eat. And she sent out her messenger to go out into the marketplace and see if he could buy some bread for her. And she was very delicate and told him, I want you to go out and buy pure white bread, white as flour. This messenger went out, her servant went out. By the time he got to the marketplace, this pure white bread was sold out. He came back to his mistress and he said to her, the pure white flour is out. The regular white flour bread is there. She said, go buy that, you fool. He went out. By the time he came there this time, that white was sold out. He came back and told her that there's no more the white, there's only pumpernickel bread, darker bread. So she said to him, well, go out and get that, we're starving. He went out to get it, it was sold out. He came back and told her there's only the flour from oats, no more wheat. So she said, go out and get it. He went out, he came back, and he said it's sold. She said, no use, I'll have to go myself. This is the second case we find of a messenger who was dumb. What destruction, what harm a bad messenger causes, as in the case of the master who sent out his messenger, his servant, to bring kamtzah and brought back a kamtzah instead, caused that destruction. Here too, she was starving, and this foolish messenger couldn't understand himself, have the intelligence to understand that in a time of famine you take what you can get. So she decided to go out herself, and she felt that it was that desperate that she couldn't put her shoes on. She was about to put her shoes on, but she said, I won't waste time with that, I'll go out barefoot. She went out into the marketplace, and she stepped on some dirt, some waste matter. She was so delicate, so refined, that the thought of stepping on that barefoot was so abhorrent to her that it caused her death. She died from revulsion. The Gemara says, other rabbis say this was not what caused her death. She couldn't find any food, and she did find a fig which Rabbi Tzadok had discarded. He had chewed on this, and he left it over. She picked up the remains of that chewed up fig, And because she was that hungry, she ate it. But because it had been eaten by someone else before, it was so revolting to her that this caused her death. The Gemara says this is what we find in the Chumash, the curse that Hashem says, in the Tochacha, the chapter of curses. Hashem says there'll come a time when the refined and delicate woman among you will be punished for these sins at that time. What was her sin? She was that wealthy, and yet she did not join the other three wealthy men, tzadikim, to help the poor. This was her punishment. A person who can afford and keeps the money for himself. Rabbi Nachman says there are wealthy people who have to give charity, and they say, we'll help the poor. But they cannot stomach going out to the market and seeing a poor man buying a piece of meat. They feel that this is unfair. They are the wealthy ones. The poor man should eat ordinary hard bread. So they feel a resentment against the poor. They will not give charity to the poor person unless they see that he is actually dying of hunger. He's starving, and then they'll give me enough to get bread, but not meat. And this ge'avah, this conceit, this haughtiness by the very wealthy who think that this money is theirs, they earn it through their own power and not a blessing of Hashem, this is what causes their destruction, their doom. As King Solomon says, that the wealth is kept for a man to act as a means of retribution against him. The Gemara says, what was the story of Rabbi Tzadok? Who he said Rabbi Tzadok had chewed a fig and then discarded it. Well, why is this fig so famous? The Gemara says because Rabbi Tzadok had delayed the destruction of the Holy Temple for 40 years. He single-handedly had kept the date postponed for a period of 40 years. Because being so great a tzaddik, he knew that the temple was doomed, so he fasted. He fasted and prayed to avoid destruction. And his fast lasted 40 years. Which means that he would eat only on Shabbat, and only on Shabbat, very, very little. Not even eat, in fact, just liquids. Just on Shabbat and holidays. He would never eat during the week for a period of 40 years successively. For that reason, the angels of destruction could not attack Yerushalmi, could not attack the Beit HaMikdash. His zechut formed a protective coating over the city until the time came that the final blow, when the decree was sealed after 40 years. Now, afterwards, as we'll learn later, the Gemara says that the Roman governor was asked and agreed to provide a doctor for Rabbi Tzadok, because he was so thin, he was like a skeleton actually, there was practically nothing covering his bones, and to cure him, the doctor gave him a prescription of very thin liquids, and slowly to increase it to thicker soup, and then afterwards to take the fig and to chew it and get the juice out and to discard that fig. This was the fig that this woman picked up, and because the fact that it had been chewed by someone else was so revolting to her that she died just for the thought of having eaten it. Just before she died, she took her gold, silver, and threw it out into the street and said, "What good is this? What can this serve now at a time of famine? You can't eat wealth." Gemara tells us that speaking about this Biryoni, this radical youth, the leader of this gang was the nephew of the chief rabbi of the Sanhedrin at that time, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. the rabbi of Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol, the rabbi of Rabbi Akiva. Yochanan ben Zakkai was the chief rabbi at the time of the destruction, and his nephew was the leader of this radical gang. Yochanan ben Zakkai sent a message to this leader, his nephew, in secret, and told him, "Come to see me, I must speak to you." His nephew came. Yochanan ben Zakkai said to his nephew, "How long are you going to do this, cause us this harm? Why don't you stop and make peace with the Romans? Perhaps we can still salvage something. You're going to destroy this whole city with hunger." His nephew, who wasn't as bad as the radicals, and why not? Because he was his nephew. Remember, the Gemara says that the children always take after the brother of the mother. Yochanan ben Zakkai was his mother's brother. So he had this good streak in him. He said to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, "I am their leader, true. But if I should dare to say, let's go against our principles and make peace, surrender, they would kill me. How can I even offer your terms?" Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, "Well then, I have a trick. I have a ruse. Let's carry out this scheme. I will let a rumor go out that I have passed away. And then they cannot bury a dead in the city. They must bury him outside of the city. So your men will let the gate be opened for this funeral procession to go through. I'll make sure that only my students carry me. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua, my two main students, will carry my coffin. Because if any stranger carries the coffin, they'll immediately know that this is a lie. I'm not dead. We know that a live person weighs much less than dead weight, a dead person. So, you just see to it that they let this coffin through without too much inspection." He agreed. Yochanan ben Zakkai let this rumor out. People came to visit him, and then finally he placed a piece of old meat in the room. This gave forth a smell like the smell of a person who has passed away. And the news spread he had passed away. They arranged for the funeral. The slow procession towards the gate of the city. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was carried by Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua. They came to the gates of the city. The radical group said, this gang said, "Let's make sure that this is not a trick. If he's dead, it won't bother him. Let's take a spear and penetrate the coffin." Yochanan ben Zakkai's nephew, the leader, knew that he was alive. He said to them, "It looked very bad for us. The Romans will say, what kind of barbarians are these that they stabbed the body of their own chief rabbi?" So they said, "Fine, well, let's just shake up the coffin to find out if he's alive." So he said, "Never. We have to show respect for the memory of chief rabbi. It'll look bad. Even that looked bad in the eyes of people." They opened up the gates. They let him through, and they walked a short distance away outside of the vision of the people in the city. They placed the coffin down on the ground, and these students came back. Yochanan ben Zakkai went out of the coffin, and he went over to the army of the Romans, who were surprised to see him. They recognized him by his robes that he was the chief rabbi. And he said to them, "Take me to your leader." They told King Aspasionis that Yochanan ben Zakkai was there to see him, and he said, "Bring him in." Yochanan ben Zakkai came aside, and he greeted him, "Peace be with you, O king, O emperor." Aspasionis heard this. He said to him, "You deserve death penalty twice. First place, disrespect to our emperor. You called me the emperor. That's disrespect. And disrespect to the emperor is punished by death. Second place, if I am the emperor, as you say, you disrespected me. Why did you wait so long to come and pay your respects to me?" Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, "I'll answer your questions in order. First place, as you say, disrespect to the emperor, it is not, because you are the emperor. I know you're the emperor, because otherwise the city of Yerushalmi would not fall victim to anybody but the emperor. Since the honor of Yerushalmi is so great, it must fall victim only to the top position possible, the emperor himself. And since you're obviously victorious, you must be the emperor, meaning the emperor in Rome must have died. They must have had a special meeting there, the leaders, and they have appointed you as the new emperor. This doesn't even take the power of prophecy, simple deduction. Secondly, you ask why I haven't come to pay my respects to you, because of the fact that you have a barrel of honey, very precious honey, but there is a serpent wound around this barrel. How do you get to the honey? So the Empress, the Aspasiana, said to him, you simply break the barrel. Breaking the barrel, the serpent will be killed, and you'll have the honey. Which means you should have destroyed the serpent, referred to the radical group, should have destroyed the wall of the city. And that way, they would be wiped out. The Gemara says that shortly afterwards, immediately afterwards, a horseman came in very quickly and said to Aspasianus, I have a message for you from Rome. He took the message out. He was at that time putting on his shoes. He had put on one shoe, was about to put on the second shoe, and this message came. He read the message, and it said, the emperor of Rome has passed away. You are now the new emperor. He was very happy, and he admired the wisdom of Rabbi Nachman. Then he started to put on a second shoe, and it wouldn't go on. Somehow it just didn't fit. This pair of shoes was no good for him. He decided, I'll take off my first shoe, get a new pair of shoes. He couldn't take off the first shoe either. That was too tightly on his foot. He sat there wondering about it. He said to Rabbi Yochanan, you're very wise. Can you explain this phenomenon? So he said, very simple. The Torah says that when a person receives good news, it increases his weight. He expands. Now, since you got the news after you had one shoe on, you expanded. The king said, very wise. Now, what is the solution? He said, very simple. You do something that will make you contract. Get somebody to walk by one you dislike very much. You'll contract. He had this done. He got a soldier who he disliked, walked by. He put on his second shoe. It fit perfectly. So he said to Rabbi Yochanan, you're very wise and very good, and therefore I will grant you a request. Make a request of me before I go in to destroy the city. Yochanan Zakkai said, I have three requests, small ones. One, give me the city of Yavne. Spare that city, because in the city of Yavne are all the rabbis of the Gemara. We want the Gemara, the Torah, to remain intact. Secondly, spare me the family of Rabbi Gamliel, because he is the family tree of King David, the royal family of the Jews. Third, give me a doctor for Rabbi Tzadok, who deserves this. He had fasted 40 years for the temple should not be destroyed. The king agreed to this, and the Gemara says, wasn't that foolish? Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai could have made a simple request. Give us a second chance. Leave us go. Leave us now. The Gemara answered his requests were not foolish, because he knew that if you ask for too much, you get nothing. This way you'd ask for a little bit, at least this much would remain, he'd have it solidly. So now he knew that he was salvaging the Torah, which is perpetual, salvaging the family of King David and Mashiach, and rewarding the one person who had kept Yerushalmi alive for 40 years more. This is the first prelude to the actual story of the destruction of Yerushalmi. We should be zocher, we'll continue this tomorrow, we should be zocher to shortly see the rebuilding of Yerushalmi, rebuilding of the Bet HaMikdash, with the coming of Mashiach. Amen. Amen. We continue the Shi'ur in Gemara. Today we continue the Shi'ur dealing with the story of the Churban Beit HaMikdash and the exile of the Jews from Eretz Yisrael after the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. This is, as we said, is the topic that is learned on Tisha B'Av. It's a mitzvah to learn these pages of Gemara then, and therefore it's very beneficial to save this tape and play it back again on Tisha B'Av. You can go through the entire sugya, the entire topic then. Up to the part where Aspasianus, the king, became emperor, and because he became emperor, he had to return to Rome to take over the throne. However, he refused to halt his siege and attack upon Yerushalmi. So in his place, he sent King Titus, known as Titus Harasha. King Titus had a very questionably admirable family tree. He was a direct descendant of Esav Harasha. King Titus was the son of Aspasianus' wife. His wife, who had a son by her first marriage. He was not the son of Aspasianus. He was the son of his wife by a former marriage, and he gave him the dubious honor, this Rasha, of being the one to attack Yerushalmi. The Gemara says that King Titus broke into Yerushalmi, and he was so evil a Rasha that he directed his attack against heaven, against Hashem, against faith, against the Torah. He broke into the Beit HaMikdash, and he came through into the Holy of Holies, where only the Kohen Gadol is permitted to enter, and then only on Yom Kippur. In order to show his disdain, his mockery of this extreme, supreme holiness, he took a zonah with him, entered into the Holy of Holies. He spread out a Sefer Torah and used that as a bed to commit this heinous crime. Then he took a sword and he stabbed the curtain over the Holy Ark at the entrance. Now, to show that he was doing battle kaviyachol against Hashem himself. A miracle occurred, and the curtain spurted forth blood, giving rise to the error on his part that he had kaviyachol actually struck at kaviyachol Hashem. The Gemara says that it was amazing. In heaven they marveled at how great the patience of Hashem was, that he did not strike him down right there. King Titus continued, collected the treasures in the Beit HaMikdash, the kalim, the utensils there. He took them with him, and he placed them on a ship going back to Rome, there to boast in the city of Rome of his great conquest. When he was in the middle of the sea, a storm arose. He looked out from the ship and realized this storm was meant for him. To him it seemed an act of Hashem to destroy him at sea, because he saw that the waters were calm all over except around the ship. Only there was the storm. Actually, this storm came up. This is a point that's very vital to know. Everything, not only humans, but everything in creation, though it is powerless to speak, for example, things that are inorganic, that have no life, They cannot speak, they cannot act. It seems they cannot think. But one power they do have. They could think as far as realizing, knowing the existence of Hashem as their creator. This applies even to stones. Now here, the sea itself rose up to defend the honor of Hashem. Though the sea was not commanded, that's the chidush. The sea was not commanded by Hashem. The sea became a Kana'i, one who rose to battle to defend the honor of Hashem, destroy one who had committed such a sacrilegious act. And this is permissible. The Gemara says that the greatness of Pinchas HaKohen, who became Kohen Gadol, was because at one time one of the Jews had committed a crime of openly having relations with a Goya, which deserves a death penalty, but not directly from the earthly court. This is a death penalty from heaven. Now, if Pinchas would have asked the Sanhedrin, the rabbis of the Supreme Court, if he should kill this person, they would have had to tell him he should not. And though the law was, therefore, that he should not, by not asking, taking a law into his own hands, he did what was right. In this case, it says, don't ask, do, because if you ask, it's forbidden. If you do, you're performing the greatest act, the greatest deed, because this is Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying the name of Hashem. This, too, therefore, was the act of the sea. The sea, by its own right, by its own volition, took the law into its own hands, knowing that for the sake of Kiddush Hashem, it may act. So the waters themselves, not commanded by Hashem, seeming to not having the intelligence to act by themselves, still, in this case, rose up to attack and to destroy King Titus. King Titus, thinking this was an act of Hashem, stood at the top of the boat and called out to heaven and said, seems to me that the Hashem of the Jews has power only at sea. Because when Paro attacked the Jews, he was wiped out only at sea. Sisera also, when he attacked the Jews, his army was drowned at the Nachal Kishon, River Kishon. So here too, the Hashem is attacking me, trying to sink me at sea. If Hashem is a Gibor, he challenged heaven, and let Hashem let me go up on dry land and there do battle against me. These were the evil words of King Titus. A voice came from heaven and said to him, you Rasha, son of a Rasha, descendant of Esav HaRasha, you want to do battle with Hashem? I have a very tiny servant, so tiny that it's practically microscopic. A tiny worm called a yitush. Very light, very tiny. Why is this called very light? Lightest being? Because this being has an opening to take in food, to consume food. And it has no opening to relieve itself of waste matter. Whatever this worm eats remains within it, and automatically it keeps growing. Go up on land and do battle with this tiny worm, not with Hashem himself, creator of all the earth, all the worlds and the heavens, and everything in it, the host of angels too. Just one simple servant, the smallest servant of Hashem, this tiny worm. King Titus came up on land, and as soon as he came to the land, this Yitush came, entered through his nostrils, and went through the opening right into the brain. That is, we wouldn't call it a brain, in his skull. And this worm kept on gnawing away in his head for a period of 7 straight years. 7 years this worm kept gnawing away at him. One day, of course, this caused extreme pain, an excruciating headache, much worse than a migraine headache. There was no way that he could stop this. They didn't have, at that time, a perfected brain surgery, cutting open the head and so on. He was forced to deal with this by just living in torture. One day he passed by a blacksmith. The blacksmith was hammering away at the anvil, making a tremendously loud noise, and the Yitush stopped. He was frightened by the noise. Stopped gnawing away. Titus felt much better. So he said, I have a solution. So he called inside people to come and keep banging away continually. As long as this banging went on, then the Yitush would refrain from gnawing away at him. He had to use different people to keep banging. So for a goy, he hired a goy to do it. He would give him 4 coins a day. To a Jew, he said, you get no pay at all, because you have enough reward in that you see your enemy suffering. 30 days this went on. Of course, this too gave him a good headache. Have to listen to this banging of the anvil continually. But it was better than having the Yitush gnawing at him. After 30 days, the Yitush got tired of waiting. He got used to the noise, and he decided to ignore this noise and went back to his job of gnawing away at him. Even it says that there were rabbis who testified as witnesses. They were at King Titus's bedside when he died, finally. When he died, the leaders of Rome, physicians and doctors, opened his head, and they found in it the form of a bird. This was as large as a bird now, weighing 2 sla'im. It's a heavy weight. And the nails of this, the claws, were like copper, iron. The beak was like copper, and the claws were like iron, the nails. Just before King Titus died, he gave an order, he issued an order, knowing that he was in danger, because he saw that the powers of Hashem are that far-reaching. He said he's afraid that when he dies he'll have to face trial, and what could happen to him then? So in order to evade this trial, to escape it, he gave out an order that when he dies, they should cremate him, burn him completely, and spread his ashes over the 7 seas, so that he could never be found by Hashem to be placed on trial. This, of course, is what he thought was a means of evading the trial. He didn't realize that it's not the body, but the soul, the spirit that goes up to trial. It's not the body that feels the pain, it's the soul. The body is nothing without the life in it. All senses are for the soul. So of course, we say that a dead person also feels pain. Pain in the grave when the worms eat away at this body. But that's also because there is part of the nefesh in the body, is part of the soul. Where there is no soul, of course, there's no pain left at all. So, King Titus was brought up to trial, and of course at this trial, naturally the results were he was found guilty. But we find the exact results later on. King Titus had a nephew whose name was Onkelos. Onkelos, a Roman, decided to convert. The Gemara tells a long story about his attempts at conversion, his reasons for it. That's the Gemara that does that. Here we have only one part of that story that refers to our story here. In order to determine whether it paid to convert, he decided first to employ magic. In those days there was real magic, it actually existed, and this magic was in a form where they could actually bring a person back from the dead to speak to the spirit of this person who died. Today, of course, we have these fraudulent operators who pretend to have seances where they would bring back voices from the dead. Naturally, it's all false today. No person can perform these acts because magic itself is dead. There is no such thing as magic today. The Gemara says that was destroyed by the rabbis of the Gemara. So no one today can make any contact with the other world, except, of course, lahavdil, the great tzadikim who do it b'kedusha. At that time there was magic. Onkelos used this magic, and he summoned 3 people from the other world. He summoned 3 because 3 constitutes a court, a bet din. Whenever a person needs advice, you should always take it from an assembly, a court, 3 people, so that you can have a fair idea of which way to, what decision to take. The first one he summoned was King Titus. And he asked him, tell me, you are in the world of truth, the heavenly world. Who is considered there the main people of since creation? Who is considered worthy there? King Titus answered, the Jews. So Onkelos asked him, what is your advice as far as attaching oneself to the Jews, becoming part of them? King Titus answered, they have too many mitzvot. It's too difficult to comply with the mitzvot. Best advice I can give you is go and attack them. If you attack them, you'll become a great leader. Because, as the Gemara says, any nation that attacks the Jews, that persecutes them, the leader becomes great, famous, world famous, very powerful. The reason is, of course, that since the Jews are so great, so high, Hashem, even when He has them attacked, He doesn't want to embarrass them by having them attacked by a lowly type of nation. He chooses a great, powerful nation to do it. So if you attack them, you become great, powerful. So Onkelos said, that's fine advice. You did it. Now tell me, what is your penalty in heaven after having followed your own advice? King Titus very sheepishly said, well, heaven decided that they would give me the penalty that I had ruled for myself. Every day, they take King Titus, they gather together all the ashes from the 7 seas, they bring this back to the original form, body and soul, and they burn him alive. After burning him alive, they spread the ashes on the 7 seas, and then this is a continuous, perpetual penalty for King Titus. Daily he goes through this torture. In addition, of course, to the Gehinnom. So, Onkelos had one opinion. Then he decided to call a second Rasha. He called upon Bil'am. Bil'am, the non-Jewish prophet who was hired by King Balak, king of Moab, to curse the Jews. He was a prophet of great power, the master of magic, master of Tum'ah, the most tameh person in that generation, perhaps that ever lived. And he did try to curse the Jews. Hashem turned this curse into blessings. And then finally, he was killed. He tried to escape the Jews afterwards by using his magic to fly up to the heavens. And Pinchas, the Kohen, summoned one of his students, and by saying one of the heavenly names, he possessed the power to fly after Balaam, to bring him back, and he killed him. When he was killed, of course, he was taken up to heaven, put on trial. What was Balaam's major crime? Of all the things he did or attempted to do, there was one item for which he was guilty, and that is that he caused thousands of Jews to be killed through a heavenly plague. Because he knew he gave Balak, the king, this advice. He told him, you tried to curse the Jews, it didn't help. You tried to attack them with your armies, it won't help. The Jews will be victorious. There's only one way to get at the Jews. And that way is, the Hashem of the Jews despises zenut, illegal relations of any manner, especially with Goyim. If you can tempt the Jews with women, selected women, tempt them to commit the sin, you will have estranged them from Hashem. You wouldn't have to lay a finger on them. Hashem will kill them. How do you get the Jews, who are so pure and so holy, to commit this crime? He gave them a long list of advice. He said, if you get the leader to do it, they'll all follow suit, follow the leader. So they had certain ruses done, certain methods used. We won't go into the details, but they did get the leader of one of the tribes, Zimri, and because he did it, the others followed suit. It was then that Pinchas came and killed this Zimri, which was a Kiddush Hashem. The act of Pinchas stopped this plague, but only after thousands and thousands of Jews had been killed. This was the act of which Bilam was guilty. Now, when he was tried in heaven, he was found guilty. And now we come to this discussion between Onkelos and Bilam. Onkelos asked Bilam the same question. Who is considered the most worthy in heaven? He answered immediately, the Jews are. So he asked Bilam, what's your advice as far as converting, becoming one of them? Bilam answered, don't look for them, don't look to attach yourself to them at all, don't be friendly with them any time in your life, stay away from them. So he said to Bilam, what's your penalty? What were you sentenced to? Bilam answered, he was sentenced to something which is considered the worst type of filth out. In Pirkei Avot, the Mishnah says, a person should learn to be humble, not to be conceited. How do you achieve this humbleness? Simply remind yourself of two things. Where you came from and where you're going to. What was your origin? A person is born from a tiny drop, something that is filthy. This drop is formed into a living being. A child is formed from this drop. Where are you going to? Dirt, dust, buried in the earth. A person would think then that he couldn't be haughty anymore. He came from dirt, he's going back to dirt. Now that drop that the person is born from, if it is a drop that comes from Kiddusha, then it's a holy birth. If it's a drop that comes from Tum'ah, illegal relations, of course, that is the worst Tum'ah out. So Bilam said that his penalty, he was sentenced to being bathed in boiling filth. That massive amount of that filth, which he had caused to be spent in sin, this was his penalty. Boiled in boiling filth forever after. There are questions about this. The Zohar Kadosh says at one point, Rabbi Arizal said there's a secret behind this which I refuse to divulge. That's how it remains in the Zohar Kadosh. Arizal later comes along and says, I will divulge the secret. Simply because, as time went by, as time goes by, the Zohar Kadosh itself says that with the advent of time, secrets become permissible to reveal. Years back, people knew very little of these secrets of heaven. As years went on, more and more secrets were revealed. The Zohar Kadosh itself became revealed. It was unknown, let's say, 1,000 years ago. The writings of the Arizal, which are unknown until the Arizal, became revealed in his time. And so more and more secrets come out, where the Zohar Kadosh says that there'll come a time when small children will know more heavenly secrets than the biggest rabbis in the past. That's the reason why Arizal was able to come out and say, this secret which Rabbi Nachman refused to divulge, I will divulge, I will reveal. That Bil'am did have, in a sense, he had a tikkun. He was corrected in a sense, because he did come back as a Gilgul, as Naval. In fact, Bil'am himself was a Gilgul. Bilam was his second time on earth. His first time he was Lavan, the father-in-law of Yaakov. Second time as Bilam. The third time he was Naval, a Jew, a bad Jew, but a Jew. This, the Arizal says, we have from the word Lavan itself. Lavan, the Lamed is Lavan, the Bet is Bil'am, and the Nun is Naval. Now this was the second one that Onkelos brought up with magic. Then, note that these two, as direct answers to his question, they said to him, stay away from the Jews, do not convert. Third one he brought up was the unmentionable one. And the unmentionable one's crime was primarily, as we said, these all had many other crimes, but the major crime committed by them, which placed them in that category of top B'nishayim of all time, his crime was that he mocked the words of the rabbis of the Gemara, which means he mocked the Gemara, the Torah Shebaal Peh. This crime, the Gemara itself says there is a special penalty for one who mocks the words of the Gemara, the rabbis of the Gemara, and it was this penalty that he got. First, Onkelos asked him, what's your opinion, who of course is the most valuable, the most worthy, as is considered by heaven? And he said, the Jews, of course. What's your opinion about converting and becoming part of them? He said, I suggest that you become part of them and seek their good, never their bad, because anybody who touches a Jew, it is like touching the pupil of his eye. At least it brings tears. It will cause suffering, crying, shedding of tears, plus the actual physical suffering. So he said to the unmentionable one, what's your penalty? How are you punished? He said, well, the punishment is already stated in the Gemara. The Gemara says anyone who mocks the words of the rabbis of the Gemara, his penalty is to be bathed in human waste. And this is the perpetual penalty of this unmentionable one. For generations past, generations to come, this is an eternal sentence that he has. Be bathed in this human waste, but it's first brought to an extreme boiling point. And then he is submerged in this. This is his continuous penalty. So we see that there are a lot of people making a very serious mistake about this unmentionable one. A lot of them are wasting their time, of course. But these are the three that were brought by Onkelos to be questioned in this matter of conversion. The Gemara says, let's stop for a moment and note that a Jew is a Jew still, because even this Jew, this Rasha, this Mamzer, still, compared to the Goyim, look at the difference. The first two that Onkelos brought up were Goyim. And they spoke, even in Gehinnom, with their suffering, they still spoke against the Jews. This one was an evil Rasha Jew. He did not attack the Jews at this stage. He still had something over those Goyim Rishayim. Now the Gemara says, this is the story of the destruction of Yerushalmi, story of the burning, the razing of the Bet HaMikdash, story which was begun with the case of Kamsa Ubar Kamsa. These two men, one was the friend and one was the enemy. The Gemara says, note, look at the rules in heaven, how Hashem judges, the justice of heaven. That so great is the power of embarrassment, so great is that sin, that Hashem was willing rather to help Bar Kamsa to avenge his being embarrassed publicly, though it meant that Hashem would bring about this act, the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash, the burning of the Holy Temple, and the exile of his own children, his people. So great is the sin of embarrassing a person publicly that stood out, that overruled even this great loss. Which, of course, teaches us that Lashon Hara is one thing, but embarrassing a person is so serious a sin, a person should avoid that at all costs. The Gemara says that we find cases where, the actual cases where people were willing to go into fire, be burned alive, rather than embarrass someone publicly. The case of Tamar, the daughter-in-law of Yehuda. It says now we come to the story of the destruction of Tur Malkah, another city in Israel. This too had a very large population of Jews, and the Gemara says what caused the destruction of this city. What was the direct cause? The direct cause was a male and female bird, chicken and a hen. How was that the cause? Because the Romans had a custom that when they had a wedding, the Chatan and Kala went out, the chuppah, they would lead a chicken and a hen rooster in front of them, saying this is a symbol of being very fruitful. Have a lot of children, just like the hen lays an egg every day. You should have many children. One day, that was the Jews did that. One day the Romans came by, a band of Romans came by. They saw this Jewish wedding with the two birds in front of them, fowl, and as could be expected, these are ordinary Jews in their eyes. They said, let's take these birds for ourselves. They grabbed the birds. The Jews were not ones to stand back and take it, so they ganged up on this band of Romans, and they beat them up very severely. These Romans came to the king, told him the Jews have revolted against you. In this major city too. The king went with an army to attack, and there was one man in this city who was so powerful, that so agile, he could leap a mile. And in his flying leap, he would kill dozens, hundreds. The king went and took his crown, placed it on the ground, and said, he became religious all of a sudden. He said, Hashem, the whole world is yours. If it pleases you, don't embarrass me by having me and my kingdom fall into the hands of one single person. This mighty warrior, this Jew, should defeat myself and my kingdom. Is too embarrassing. I pray you to give me that. Now, the Gemara says, note that a sincere prayer, no matter what it is, even by a goy, a rasha, is still accepted warmly by Hashem. It has its effect in heaven. And this resulted in the downfall of this great, powerful warrior. A warrior who was so great that the Gemara says Rabbi Akiva at one time thought that he was Mashiach. So great was he, and so much did he mislead even Rabbi Akiva had to think that he was a Mashiach. He had an army of special giborim, powerful soldiers, and in order to enter his army, they had to pass a test. Even this is the first test was they had to show their courage and bravery by taking a hatchet and chopping off their thumb. The rabbis told him, that's foolish. You'll have a strong member, they'll all be cripples. So he asked, what's your advice? So they said, our advice is a person to prove his strength by becoming a member of your army should ride a horse at top speed, and while riding past a large tree, pull it out by the roots while riding at top speed. If he's that strong, he can enter your army. The Gemara says that he had an army of 400,000 Jews. 400,000 Gibonim, 200,000 who had the thumbs chopped off before, and then 200,000 more who were able to pull out a tree by the roots while galloping at top speed. Now this army, of course, wreaked havoc among the Romans. One day, his ge'ava overcame him, and he said the pasuk in Tehillim, pasuk halo ata elokim zenachtanu, lo tetzeh elokim b'tzivotenu. Hashem, you have left us, don't come with us in our army, in our battle. Because he said that, this was his downfall. So the Gemara asks, wait a minute, before we go further, this is a pasuk in Tehillim. It was said by King David. How could King David have said this? So the Gemara says, you are not reading it right. This pasuk has a question mark at the end of it. King David asked Hashem, can it be that you left us and you're not coming with us in our army? What chance do we have? This leader said it, not asked it. He said, you're not coming with us, meaning we don't need any help, we can take care of it ourselves. We'll take care of the battle. So Hashem said, you'll take care of the battle, let's see you battle also one of my servants. I'll give you a break, a strong servant. A serpent, poisonous serpent came down and bit him, and of course the poison killed him. When he died, the Roman king said, I accept this as a miracle from heaven to save me, and therefore I will give the Jews another chance. And so he withdrew his army from the siege, and as he withdrew, the people started to celebrate. And they started to eat and drink and light torches and candles all over the city. When the king saw this, he said, the Jews are mocking me. They're doing this to celebrate my embarrassment. For that, he said, I'm going back. The Gemara says that he came back with an army of 300,000 soldiers with bared swords, and they killed Jews there for 3 days and 3 nights without a stop. The city was so large, population so great, that 3 days and 3 nights this bloodshed went on. On one side of the city there was this bloodshed, the other side of the city they were still celebrating and making merry. So large was this city they couldn't even contact with each other. This shows the population of the Jews at that time was so great. The Gemara says, how great was the population of the Jews then? Let's take a city. The Gemara says there were 60 large cities. In this 60 large sections in this city of Turmalka. And each one of these sections had at least 600,000 or 1,200,000 people living in these sections. Now, the Gemara says there were much more than that, but for one case, there was a city that had so many millions, 40 million Jews living, a section of a city, 40 million Jews living there. Of course, these were all wiped out. The Gemara says, one rabbi stated, I saw this section, 600,000 Jews living in that section. There isn't room for 600,000 reeds, thin reeds to grow in that section alone. And yet there were 600,000 Jews there, living, each one with a private home and a garden, field to cultivate. There was one Apikonis, a Kofeh, who said to Rabbi Hanina, one of your own rabbis just testified you haven't got room there for 600,000 reeds. That's like 600,000 blades of grass couldn't fit in there. That means you're lying. Chas v'shalom. You rabbis of the Gemara are lying, chas v'shalom, when you say these exaggerated statements. 600,000 in every village and 40 million in a little larger town. Yerushalmi had hundreds of millions. You're lying. The Chalina answered, chas v'shalom. We're not saying this as a fantasy, as an exaggeration. We're stating this as fact. There were really that many Jews then. But how come that you cannot fit 600,000 blades of grass in this section? Or in the city of Yerushalmi today, it's so tiny, smaller than the smallest town. And yet there were so many hundreds of millions of Jews living then. The answer is that the Torah says Eretz Yisrael is called Eretz Tzavi, the land of the deer. Just as the deer skin, when the deer is stripped of its skin, we find that the skin becomes a very tiny bit of hide. So tiny that we can never believe possible that this tiny bit of hide covered the body of the deer. How did it cover it? When it's on the body there, it stretches. So too, Eretz Yisrael is very tiny when there's no one living there. As people move in, it's like the hide of a deer. The more people go inside, the more space there is for them. You can put billions of people into Eretz Yisrael. There'll always be space. There'll never be a shortage of space. As the Gemara says, about the miracles of Yerushalmi, that no person ever said, I find Yerushalmi too narrow, too confined to live in. When the Jews had to visit the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple on the holidays, to bring the korbanot, there was enough room for all Jews of Israel to come into this city of Yerushalmi alone. The bigger miracle was that when they came to the Holy Temple, which is only like 1 or 2 city blocks large, all the Jews could fit into the yard of the Holy Temple, which is just a few hundred yards wide. And there, when it came time to bow, each one had 6 feet of space to bow in. Now, how can you have, in a few hundred yards, 6 feet of space for millions of Jews, hundreds of millions, or whatever number there was? The answer is that a place that is holy is not governed by the laws of space. It's above the laws of space. Which is why, finally, we come to the Holy Ark itself. The space in the Holy of Holies was exactly 20 amot. And the 2 birds, the 2 angels, figures of angels, the kiruvim, figures of faces of children, these 2 angels' wingspan covered wall to wall exactly to the iota. Now, where did the Holy Ark stay? Between these 2 figures, these 2 angels. Between these 2 angels there wasn't a millionth of an inch. And yet the Holy Ark could fit into this space, also 20 feet wide, 10 amot. How did it fit in? Because this was so holy a place that there was no rule of space whatsoever. It didn't require space. Just as heaven is nothing to do with space, so too this has the Kedusha of heaven, and that's why the Holy Ark could be there, though there was no space physically. This is the secret of the power of Eretz Yisrael, which is that holy, it's above the laws of space, and why there was so vast a population. But because of the sin at that time, or a large number, vast majority, were wiped out, killed. The few that remained were sent into exile where we are till this day. But with the implicit faith that this is a temporary galut, coming to its end, terminating now with the coming of Mashiach, which we look forward to seeing the rebuilding of the third final eternal Bet HaMikdash. Mehira b'yameinu. Amen v'yamen.